you said something about how the singers would sing in different accents. And I remember
Yeah.
growing up, I would always wonder, like, okay, if the person is singing in a Lebanese accent, it means they're Lebanese. Like, that's always what I assumed. But then I would later on hear that Lebanese person singing in a Khaliji accent, and I'm like, I do a double take. I'm like, wait, I don't understand. How are you doing that? I mean, does anyone else, do you think, outside of the Arab world do that? Is that normal? And why do they even do it?
Why is a fantastic, I don't know why. I mean, for the longest time, singers would sing in an Egyptian accent because Egypt was, and I would argue still is, the cultural epicenter for the rest of the quote unquote Arab world, right?
Mm.
Um, and a lot of singers would adapt. I mean, Nancy Hajjar, who is Lebanese, still sings in
Yeah.
an Egyptian accent. That's a very common
Mhm.
thing. So people would do that. As far as there are other artists like Yara or even Muhammad Asaf, who I love. They have done kind of Khaliji music, and it's like, oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting, like that, and I understand why. Is because that sound right now is very quote unquote popular, and it's hitting that mainstream.
Mhm.
Wow, I'm so Arab. I just did this.
I know you did. You're doing a lot.
Doing a lot of this right now. It's fine.
I'm here for it.
um, but again, I think part of it is just the industry propping up these artists to say, hey, look, this is the sound that's happening. You need to make records like this. It's also just tapping into different markets, I think, for those artists too, right? Like Iraqi kind of beats and beat structures are not necessarily what people in Lebanon are listening to, or Wet Furi is not necessarily something that people in Tunisia are listening to. It's a very different thing. We haven't even talked about North Africa and just how they have a completely different sound, which is so interesting to me. Like they're using Afro beats, they're using reggaeton, they're using a lot of different sort of elements. I think a lot of it is because of just sort of very violent colonial policies that kind of happen in those different countries. And they're also catering to a very different market. They're not necessarily catering to the Mashriqi side. Like they're very much catering to a European audience, which is most, speaks a lot of French or Spanish or Dutch or German or other languages. And you see these North African artists just singing in all those different languages, sometimes all in one song. So the only other thing that I could possibly think of is when in hip hop in the US, you have artists from the East Coast do like a West Coast sort of beat song sort of thing. Like when everybody had their song produced by DJ Mustard because it was very LA, it was very whatever. Or like in the early 2000s when everybody wanted to do like a chopped and screwed sort of Houston style song.
Oh yeah, H-Town.
Everybody, hey, everybody was doing that. Like 50 Cent was doing it. The Game was doing it. They're not from Houston. Like they get, but everybody was doing it. Or Atlanta, like everybody was doing the whole like snap your finger kind of beat or whatever. Everybody was doing that. So that's the only thing I could think of. But even then, 50 Cent wasn't necessarily rapping in Houston drawl. You know what I'm saying? Like that wasn't happening. So it's interesting that it happens here, and I'll be honest, I have to explore that more and just try to understand that for myself, what that really means. But it is noticeable.
Yeah, no, that's so true.
Yeah.
We touched a little bit about the West and its influence. I want to get your expertise on how the West has really influenced Arabic music, and how do we see that in present day Arabic music?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like Arabic music was very narrative driven, incredibly narrative driven. There was an emphasis on the audience, I think. If you listen to old Kulthum records, or even some older Abdul Halim records, Asmahan, all these different classical artists, you'll usually hear the audience. And that's because they would record what they were singing in front of a live audience, and that was what was sold, right? It was very much a relationship with the audience in that way. I think that's how it was then. The other big thing then was that, you know, you had elaborate sort of bands playing with you, like very large bands with so many different instruments playing, and they would all play these different, you know, all the instruments would play their part kind of in the song. Whereas, you know, now there's not so much really a relationship with the audience in that same way. You know, you're recording a song in a studio. It's happening it's all kind of happening in and it's a controlled environment. And you don't necessarily need the band anymore. I have a drum machine now that can play the durbeki, and like I got it. That's it. I don't need all that anymore.
Yeah.
I have somebody who can play the keyboard, and I can just change a couple things, hit a couple things that can be as many different instruments as I want it to be, and that's what gets played. So I think a lot of it is that, but I think, you know, there are other elements of Western music that then creep into. I mean, we talked about Hamid Diab's EDM album, like that. Like he put that out at a time when David Guetta went mainstream, and you know, Axwell went mainstream. Like a lot of these big house producers went very mainstream, right? So he did that. He jumped on that. A lot of other Arab artists did too. I don't want to single out Diab. A lot of other Arab artists did that too. But you know, you also had people start to incorporate elements of rap and hip hop even into their music, which was interesting. The person that I always really appreciated was Hakeem, because Hakeem actually collaborated with Western artists, and I love that so much. Like I remember he had a song with James Brown, like it was very random at the time.
It's very random.
He had one of my all-time favorite songs, Diggy Diggy, with Don Omar, and like put out a whole like Arabic reggaeton sort of collab, which was very cool. Yeah. Super cool. So I think you had just like that willingness to want to try something different and just want to work with these artists too.
That's really cool.
He also did a song with Stevie Wonder. I forgot about that. Hakeem did do a song with Stevie Wonder too. Yeah, Hakeem really is just kind of
that's insane. He's been all over.
Yeah, he's kind of been all over. But you know, songs are also shorter. Like they're 3 minutes long, 4 minutes long. They're not the 7, 8, 9 minute ones that Abdul Halim used to do, and they're not the hour plus that Kulthum used to do.
Oh my God, yeah.
So they're very short, and they're very just kind of made for today's audience.
Yeah, you know, it's so sad because I loved listening to the old school music. Like Abdul Halim is one of my favorites to listen to. And then listening to the reaction of the audience as he's singing. You know, just this weekend, my husband and I went on like a little road trip, and I was playing Abdul Halim for him, and he thinks that, oh my God, I don't listen to this guy crying. I was like, whoa, that is disrespectful. Let me tell you a little bit about who Abdul Halim is. He's not crying. That's the Mawal. And I'm like trying to explain the Mawal. And then you hear like people in the background, the reaction, they're like, Allah, Allah, you know, like when they get so excited and they're like hyping Abdul Halim up. It's like trying to explain to people that reaction is like a positive reaction. And that's them kind of being like, yeah, we want more. It's amazing. It's incredible. And then I play like, I'm guilty of this, but I play like Amr Diab after Abdul Halim.
We all do, yeah.
Just to get a little pumped because it's very upbeat.
Yeah, I mean,
like
it's just it's a different thing, right? Like with Abdul Halim, he's telling a story that the song is changing throughout. Like it's not just the same sort of pattern the entire time. Sometimes it changes tempo. Sometimes it changes octave. Like it's very melodic in that way. And I love that. That's why I like listening to live records, because then you just hear these random guys going Allahu Akbar, and they're like really into it. Like they're like super into it, which is wonderful, you know. I was reading this book about Tarab during quarantine, and apparently the reaction and the feeling you're supposed to have from Tarab is very similar to taking ecstasy, or like it's that kind of sort of it's that kind of high. I don't know what that's like. I've never done ecstasy.
You want to explain that?
Yeah, never done ecstasy, not planning on it, but that's what the book said. And I think that's just so fascinating, because when you hear the audience react, they are just so emotional and they're on this high. And like, that's so fascinating that a voice can do that, that somebody's voice can
Wow.
produce that kind of feeling. Whereas, yeah, like now, okay, you know, if 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 Amr Diab comes on, there's no audience
Hmm.
reaction, but it's fun and it's like it's nostalgic.
Yeah.
Like for me, like 90s and 2000s era pop is a source of nostalgia for me because that's just like what I heard growing up, and you
Mm.
hear it at weddings. Even now, 30 years later, it's the same like four
Yes.
songs that they play at weddings. And it's like, okay, like I got it. We need to update it a little bit, but it's fine. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I hear you.
What's that song that get like from the 90s or early 2000s that when you hear at a wedding, you're like, oh, this is my jam, and you like bolt to the dance floor? What's that one song?
There's, oh my gosh, there's too many. It's like you have 2 feet comes to mind as like
Thinking you have
wedding
feet too.
diaspora vibes, right? Like I feel like every diaspora wedding has some you have 2 feet
Mhm.
song, whether it's Sahrani or Allah Alik Yasidi, like it's one of those two
Oh my God, I
always.
was literally thinking Alani Cassidy. I wonder if he's gonna say that. And then you said it.
It's always you have 2 feet.
Yeah.
Or um
Hmm.
Feres Karam Tanura, which I don't like that song for a
Oh my
multitude
God.
of reasons.
Same. Same.
It's incredibly misogynist, it's incredibly disgusting, and just it's not that
Hmm.
great of a song personally, but
Yeah.
everybody likes the people here,
I
and they're like,
don't.
oh, we got a depth gate, it's time to go, like here it is.
Yeah, I'm like, to
So
this? Really? To this? This is what we want to get to, y'all? Like, really?
yeah, like why this
Oh,
one? We don't need that, it's fine.
jeez.
But yeah, like, and Noor Al Ain, like, oh,
Oh,
everybody
yeah.
loves our,
Of
yeah,
course.
you know, like that's a classic. Yeah.
That's a classic. You can't hate that. You can't.
No, you can't. Or even like
No.
Nancy Hashem's, what was that one? It's like Bendan Wala Al Jaw. Like everyone loves
Oh,
that
yeah.
song.
Everyone loves. I love that
Yeah.
song. Oh my God. It gets me
Yeah.
so pumped whenever I'm at like a wedding or a
Yeah.
party. I'm like, yes, we do. Wallah, Joe, let's go.
But it's funny, right? Because like I'll sit here and say like, oh, we do this at Arab weddings. We all play the old songs. But then if you think about it, even at American weddings, we're still playing 24 Karat Magic. I'm like, okay, like this that song is
Yeah,
like 5 years old now. Like we don't have to
exactly.
do this anymore. You know, so I think we play shout and shout. You know, like we do the same thing. So
That's so
um,
true. We do. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It makes me wonder. We have like a very unique idea and very unique understanding of like Arabic music, what emotion it evokes, what we play for parties and what we play to relax and what reminds you of like Sunday mornings making falafel and hummus and whatnot. What are some misconceptions about Arabic music that you feel like exist, be it in the West or in the Middle East?
How much time do we have?
I see your eyes glistened and you were like, oh, this is it.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest misconception about Arabic music is that people assume that it's Arab pop and then that's it. And I hate that because there are so many other artists that are doing so many other really interesting things and pushing boundaries and talking about taboo subjects. And I love that. Like, I think it's so fascinating. I think part of it has to do with just the Arabic music industry and who they decided to prop up and who they're exporting and all that. And
Yeah.
I think part of it also is just, particularly for diaspora, and I'm speaking as a member of the diaspora, really.
Mm.
It's a nostalgia thing. Like it's a wow, I really miss my country, or I miss where I grew up, or something. And this song was on the radio, and this was very popular, so it tends to be that Arab pop thing, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of I know I'm very biased toward hip hop, but a lot of rappers are doing such cool music. I
Mm.
especially want to shout out North Africa because I just think if North Africans in general are just doing the most interesting music, period.
Mm.
Um, like I said this before, but they're experimenting with beat structures.
Mm.
They're dabbling with different languages, and it's all from a very fraught history. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
their way of just kind of exploring their identity, which is so interesting to me.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about like Maharagan and
Oh my
in Egypt
God.
and everything, and just like how
Oh my
even
God.
within Egypt there's controversy around that genre and what they do, but it's too fun. Like it's people exploring,
So
and
fun.
it's a
Oh
form
my
of
God.
resistance, right? It's a way
Yeah.
for people to kind of resist the structures and the powers at be. You can't. It's truly. I mean, they call it shabby for a reason. Like it's truly of the people. Like that is a
Yeah.
people's genre.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest misconception is you listen to Nancy Ajram, you listen to, Amr Diab, you listen to Hisham Abbas and think that's Arabic music. That's one part of Arabic music. That is very much one part of it. I don't want to take away from what Arab pop has done. I really don't.
Yeah.
Um, I personally think that there's more interesting music that we haven't even tapped the surface with. And I think a lot of it is just because, again, the industry, I think a lot of it is classism. I think a lot of it is racism.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why those artists aren't getting their due necessarily. And we haven't even talked about like Sudani music, like just how
Oh my
beautiful it is,
God.
or
Yeah.
Libyan music and how beautiful that is too. And I think those are the biggest misconceptions. And we're not giving artists the platform and the venues that they need to be able to do that, and to be able to succeed. And I think a lot of it is just the structures that are in place.
Yeah. No, that's so true because even if I think about it, I can't name one Libyan musician. I can maybe think of a North African, like Sheb Khaled. Everybody kind of knows Sheb Khaled. He seems like he kind of made it into the mainstream, but that's it. Like I struggle to name any North African musicians. I know some Egyptian, but most of it is the Levant that have kind of just dominated. But it doesn't mean that
Mhm.
they don't exist. They do exist. It just seems like it's very difficult to get into like the mainstream. And you're right. I think it has a lot to do with racism and classism. And people are like, oh, I don't understand it. I'm not going to listen to it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there are a couple, like you said, like Sheb Khaled is one. There are a couple that broke through or whatever. That looks like Sabah Rubai is the other one, who's Tunisian.
Yeah.
Sheb Mami is another one, but Sheb Mami
Sheb
is a very
Mami.
problematic human being, very
Yeah.
problematic human being that we just won't touch him. And Saad
Hmm.
Lamjarrad, another very problematic
Oh
human
my
being that
God.
has also
Yeah.
broken through.
Hmm.
Seems like the problematic
Yeah.
ones are the ones that are breaking through here.
I know.
But
A trend.
uh, there are just there are so many other interesting artists that are doing such cool different music, and I
Mhm.
wish that they would be streamed in the same way or given that same kind of attention that other artists are being
Yeah.
given.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about, I like what you did right there, that little move. So we talked a lot
Just me over
about,
here doing this.
I know, Dan, are you just like, as you're talking about all these artists, are you kind of like playing those little music clips in your mind and just like, yeah, groove into them? Okay, figured you were.
You say Sheb Khaled, and immediately I hear dee 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 dee. So like,